Please welcome Emil Pagliarulo.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, Konsoll. Thank you, Bergen. Designing the Cities of Skyrim. I will jump right in. Let me start with my completely unnecessary slide about who I am, because that was just covered. Emil Pagliarulo, Design Director at Bethesda Game Studios. I've been there about 18 years now. Worked on most of the games, as you can see. Although this talk is designing the Cities of Skyrim, for me, a lot of Skyrim comes back to the very first game I worked on at Bethesda. Literally, the day I started, I was immediately put on Blood Moon, which was the expansion to Morrowind. And the thing about Blood Moon is it is set on the Isle of Solstheim, which is sort of, a colony of Skyrim. And so when you think about Skyrim, the work that I personally started doing on Skyrim started way back when I was developing sort of Nord culture for Solstheim. And this is where I have to tell you, this is where I'm actually not nervous to do this talk. I'm nervous to do this talk in Norway because now you can see through the bullshit of all the Nord culture that we basically came up with. So please forgive me in advance as I go through this. That's Solstheim. And there's Skyrim. And so, diving right into the Cities of Skyrim. Let's see if this fancy laser pointer works in a second. So for me, what is it about the Cities of Skyrim that I like? Did I design the Cities of Skyrim? Let's cover that first. No, I had a hand in it. As the senior designer and writer of Skyrim, Skyrim already had two very capable senior guys who were the lead designers, Kurt Coleman and Bruce Nesmith. And I came onto the project at the end of Fallout 3 to help out and lend a hand. And one of the things I did was started doing pre-production and design work on the cities. And what I love about the Cities of Skyrim, they sort of encapsulate the best parts of that game. And really, they are an example of every discipline and everyone working together. Art, design, code, production, and that's really what I want to talk about today. So in Skyrim, there are 9 major cities. Each one has a distinct vibe. Hundreds of NPCs throughout the game in the cities. Each city has an opening scene, and I'll cover all this stuff. A lot of the cities have a faction headquarters. And quests, of course, all different kinds of quests in the cities. And so if you look at all this stuff, right, these are the major elements of Skyrim, and really of any Bethesda game, and in Skyrim, they're all encapsulated in the cities. And then, of course, there's the Civil War, and last but not least, one of the biggest themes of Skyrim, dragons. So going right in. So here we go. Yeah, that works. So 9 cities, I actually had to go back and count several times to make sure there were actually 9. And yes, there are 9 cities in Skyrim, which is crazy now that I think about it. And some are big, some are small, and I'll cover that as well. So let's go through the list. Whiterun, right in the center there. And if you look, I think that this is from the strategy guide. This is just a top-down map. You can see with the layout of Whiterun. Windhelm over there. And you can already get a sense of the even the coloration and the layout, how different they are. Riften. Riften is sort of the sort of shadier, seedier city. Solitude, which is the capital up there. Dawnstar, near and dear to my heart because some Dark Brotherhood stuff takes place up there. Markarth, over to the west. Falkreath. Morthal. And Winterhold, where the College of Mages is. So that's a lot of ground to cover. So let's talk about vibe and what that means. So one of the goals for each city was that it was going to have a different vibe. And what do we mean by vibe? Vibe for us was different art, different architecture, different fiction. Okay? And so, for example, Markarth is built into the ancient ruins of the city. So that was sort of important. But I'm going to go through 2 cities specifically to tell you a little bit about the process we went through. So Whiterun. one of the biggest cities in the game, one of the most important. It's actually the first major city that you get to after you, it's actually at the very beginning of the game, you get to Riverwood, and then you have to make your way over the mountains to Whiterun. And so here are some screenshots from Whiterun, just to get a sense of what it looks and feels like. That's Dragon's Reach. So is that Whiterun? No, that's not Whiterun. That is Aedoros from Lord of the Rings, from Rohan. And so here are some, when we talk about inspiration, okay? The next slide will be pretty telling, but these are actually photos. These pictures are actually from the original design document, and some of the stuff in this presentation is from the original design document from Whiterun that I put together in, I want to say, 2008, 2009. Skyrim, we had the lucky release date of 11/11/11, so it was a couple years before the game came out. But I pulled these right from the design document. I think that's the Mead Hall from Beowulf. These are both stills from Lord of the Rings. And so I'm not going to drown you guys in text, but the reason I wanted to put this stuff up here is that this is actually the text from the original design document to show you a little bit about the process. And if you read the very first line, Whiterun is essentially Aedoros, Rohan's main city in the Lord of the Rings. So we knew that that's what we wanted this city to be like. We were so inspired by Lord of the Rings and the visuals, we knew we had to have a city that looked like that. And so when I was writing up the design documentation for the cities, I'd have a section on theme. Whiterun is basically strong Nord culture. Whiterun is a city of wood and wind, very much like Aedoros. That was sort of one of the themes. And another section on layout. It's located on the plateaus of a cold, windy mountain, and there were meant to be 3 districts. Plains District, the Wind District, the Cloud District. I'll just keep these up here for a second if you just want to get a sense of that. Now, this is the design map that I drew, the same way I draw all my designer maps in the invaluable MS Paint. And if you look, what's really funny is that what I love about my job, and I actually laugh about it, I am a professional dungeon master. Like, I'm still 13 years old. In fact, when I do these maps, all the symbology, even the way I show inclination in that statue right there, that all comes from the D&D Red and Blue Basic and Expert books. And so that's how I think in my head. So you see here the map. This is the original designer map. You've got the Noble District, the Common District, and the Trade District. That was before we actually named them. But so the way we would approach this is, before art ever gets their hands on this, before they ever start designing unique architecture, they need to know what the design parameters are. And so, generally speaking, when we do any city, we'll do a basic design map and list all the buildings and list all the NPCs. And things change, but it's sometimes amazing to see how close we stayed to that original vision. So this design to ship. So you can see that's the original design map I did, and that is actually the city. And so when the artists get it, they are not beholden to this crappy designer map, okay? They need to give us what we need in design, which is, all the buildings, all the stores, the general layout. But, it was a good collaboration, and you can see, the districts pretty much line up. There's 3 different districts, they're walled, and that's a key word right there, walled, right? One of the goals we had for our cities, we wanted to do big open cities streaming in with no loads. That's something that we really wanted to do. Really wasn't possible. We got the tech a little bit better. So, but the cities of Skyrim really lend themselves to building them the way we needed to, because they all needed fortifications and walls. So when you go through the front door of a city in Skyrim, it loads into a separate interior. Now that proved difficult for us in some ways. For example, when you get on the top of a dragon and you're flying over a city, if you look down, you can generally see the layout of the city, but it's faked. It's not the actual city. You'll see no NPCs walking around because it's a separate load. Let's talk about another city, Windhelm. And if Whiterun was wood and wind, Windhelm was stone and snow, okay? That was the goal for Windhelm. So and one of the things we did when we started out, when entrenching ourselves in Nord culture, in Elder Scrolls Nord culture, is I think a lot of us were like, oh, all Viking stuff is cold and snowy. And then it was the artists really, to their credit, like, no. Like, if you go to Scandinavia, you'll see there's a lot of green, there's a lot of rain, there are plains, there are, different topology. But Windhelm for us was really representative of that cold, snowy city. And so there's the layout. And here are some screenshots of Windhelm. So you see a very different vibe than Whiterun. So cold and snow. There's Ulfric Stormcloak, the Jarl, sitting on his throne. So is that Windhelm? No, that's not Windhelm. What is that? Anybody take a guess? That is actually Hogsmeade. So this was actually, again, pulled right from the original design document. Hogsmeade was one of the inspirations, that snowy street scene from Harry Potter. So again, these photos pulled right from the design doc. There's another Hogsmeade photo there. I think this is actually from like the Game of Thrones art book. Some color real, that's a real castle somewhere, from Germany, I think, or Switzerland. But so this was the vibe we were going for Windhelm. If you look at the theme of Windhelm, what is the themes of Windhelm? The theme of Windhelm is actually racial tension. Windhelm is a Nord city where the Dark Elves have moved in. The Dark Elves have gray skin. They've moved into a district that they call the Grey Quarter. So while we had something to say about immigration pre-Trump. So we were very prescient. We didn't even know. And the other, so that's one of the themes is actually, so this tension with the Dark Elves, and the other theme is, because why not, as if all that weren't bad enough, a mysterious killer has been stalking the snowy streets of Windhelm at night and has already claimed 3 victims. So the themes of Windhelm are actually racial tension and serial killers. So let's see if we carried out with that. The layout, I'm not going to bore you with this, but one of the things with the layout, and if you read there, it says the frozen wheel. That was an important theme of this frozen city, was a frozen water wheel right at the entrance. Giant visual, I just love that. And so that was a core to the city. And the districts are the Stone Quarter, Central District, the Grey Quarter. One of the big things about the Grey Quarter is where the Dark Elves live. Valenstrad, translated from the ancient Nordic Valenstrad, means Avenue of Valor, and here's where the Nordic bullshit really comes in. This is part of the naming that we did, coming up with all these sort of Nordic names and sort of extrapolating from different Germanic languages and trying to come up with these words that felt right. One of the most important parts of the Valenstrad is the pit. Well, the pit is the arena, and the centuries-old fighting arena that has, according to legend, claimed more lives than any single war the Nord people have ever been involved in. So that was central idea for this city, was the original arena, this fighting pit. It felt much more like Conan, like the fighting pit in Conan. And then the Docks District. And there's the designer map. You can see there is the frozen wheel that I was obsessed over. Now, if you look at design to ship, you know what? It's like, here's a good example of like, the layout of this didn't really need to be exactly like that. So the artists, there are some similarities, right? There are, but all of the buildings that we needed, all of the stores, the Temple of Talos, the Hall of the Dead, all of that stuff is incorporated in the real map, in the real city. So that's an example of, from paper to ship, what that process was like. But really, the cities and most of the game are about the NPCs, the non-player characters. And here you see some of them. There's Lydia, who is sworn to carry your burdens. There is Balgruf the Greater, the guards, the Battleborns, and the Greymanes, and some folks. And these are all the NPCs from the city of Whiterun alone. And there's about 70 people here, I want to say. And so it's about 50 to 70 people per city, roughly. Now, a quick Google search told me that the population of Bergen is around 280,000. Okay, the population of a Skyrim city is 70. Right, so a lot of that for us it's an illusion. It's smoke and mirrors. That was a big concern. Can we make this? Can we actually call this a city? It's not like there's a giant population here, but through some tricks, we sort of felt like we did our best. And so when you think about the cities, the main things that we had to deal with were faces, clothing, voices, schedules, and dialogue. And again, these are the NPCs for all over the game, but most of those NPCs are actually in the cities. So I want to say that Skyrim shipped with 70,000 lines of spoken dialogue. At least half, probably 50,000 lines of those are in the cities. A lot of them most of them had unique faces, not all of them. Different outfits, a lot of them shared outfits. So there's, that is definitely a huge art lift right there. Voices. Back in the Oblivion and Fall 3 days, we had such tight budgets for voices, not all of the audio would fit on the disc. And so when we started hitting Skyrim, the real concern for us was recording schedule and getting all this stuff recorded. And actually, we ended up, and we didn't know what we didn't know, right? So we had all these voices, and they were much more, they were like European voices. We didn't actually add the Nordic-sounding voices until much later to get that accent and that more Nordic vibe. And actually, in trying to get actual English professional voice actors who are English-speaking, but that actually have an authentic, Swedish or Norwegian or Icelandic accent was difficult, but we found some really great folks. Schedules. Now, when I talk about the voices, that's sort of encapsulated into the dialogue and all the dialogue we had to write. But the scheduling was critical for us because the scheduling is the one thing about a Bethesda Game Studios game is it's a video game, but really it's a simulation, right? There are rules in place, and part of the simulation is the NPCs are on a schedule, they live their lives. And so if you follow most NPCs, they will work at a store, they will get up, they will go home, they'll lock their doors at night. And that was a way for us to make the cities seem bigger sometimes than they were because we could totally, sort of have them in shifts. Different NPCs come, different NPCs go. And that is something that we had to work on, even in late beta, getting that mix right of how the NPCs felt as they moved around. We used some different systems there. People might not know this, but we had systems for the NPCs and the cities in Skyrim that's sort of like really under the hood, sort of hidden stuff like family relationships. For example, if you killed someone and their mother, brother was another NPC in that game, they would eventually send mercenaries out to hunt you down. Stuff like that. Or because one of the rules for Skyrim is we wanted you to be able to kill anyone because you are not, you don't have to play the good guy. You can skulk around the city and be an assassin and steal stuff, and sometimes that means, killing people in the simulation. So you could kill a storekeeper. So what does that mean for you if you want to play the game and buy and sell stuff from that store? We had to have an alternate storekeeper come in. So every vendor in the game sort of had an alternate that would come in, and we figured, that would cover our bases. So NPCs. So another element that we realized in Skyrim that was important for us is opening scenes. When I talked about in the city of Windhelm, the racial tension with the Dark Elves, right? This is the opening scene of Windhelm, and this opening scene actually deals with that theme. There are these two Nord bullies who are basically accosting this dark elf woman right here. And so we realized that for every city we did in Skyrim, we needed to have an opening scene, some kind of scripted scene that you would experience as soon as you enter the city that would encapsulate the themes of that city. So that as soon as you entered, you would go, oh, okay, I get it. That's what this place is about. And so for Windhelm, that theme comes out right in the opening scene. But we have opening scenes for every city. And so in Riften, which is the scummy sort of the city with the docks. You have a scene here where instantly there's a woman talking about the Thieves Guild, her troubles with the Thieves Guild, and a woman called Maven Blackbriar, who's the matron of one of these powerful families. So you instantly understand that, oh, there's this woman who's pulling the strings, and the Thieves Guild, they're involved in this city. And so it's funny, I actually looked, I found an internet poll, what are your favorite scenes, your favorite opening scenes in Skyrim? And the two, so basically people like stabbings, is like, that's my takeaway, because this was the top of the list. But it's so impactful. So what is happening here is that there's a city called Markarth, and there's a group of people who are called the Reachmen. They're sort of like the indigenous people. There's a lot of backfiction to them, but they don't like the fact that the Nords have moved into the city. And so they're sort of almost carrying out these terrorist attacks on Markarth. And right when you enter the city, there's a woman in the marketplace. One of these Reachman guys, he comes in and infiltrates the city and stabs her right in the marketplace. It's this really traumatic thing, and that leads to deals with the themes of the city. And a lot of these, by the way, what's important for us, these scenes lead directly into quests or quest lines. So they accomplish multiple goals. Another popular scene is in Solitude. One of the main stories behind Skyrim is the Civil War. The Imperial Legion is fighting with the Stormcloaks, and there's the true High King. And this guy right here, poor Rogvir, he was a guard in the city, and he let his enemy go. He let Ulfric, the High King, he let him escape. And so they're executing him for it. And so as soon as you enter the city, you get this scene, you get to learn about those themes and understand what's happening there. So another big thing for us in the cities is they serve as the faction headquarters for the main factions in the game. And so if the cities are sort of, the ultimate places where you have all these NPCs, the faction headquarters are the places where you get the quest lines and the bulk of the gameplay in Skyrim. So this is Jorvaskr. This is the Mead Hall in Whiterun, and that is the faction headquarters for the Companions. They are sort of like the Fighters Guild of Skyrim. They're also werewolves, because of course. This nondescript little entrance here on the docks in Riften is actually the entrance to the Thieves Guild. The Thieves Guild actually is in the sub-level of the city in a place we call the Ratway. And that's the Thieves Guild headquarters, which is a tavern called the Ragged Flagon. This is the College of Mages in the city of Winterhold, which is basically the Mages Guild of the game. So that's where all that gameplay comes from. And so, having the faction headquarters in the cities allowed us, it was great because when you're doing the faction missions, that meant leaving the city and coming back regularly. And for us, that meant the players would always need to come back to the city, and we could really utilize that necessity. And so a lot of times, like when you come to a city, we try to design all of them so all the main services are right up front, right after you enter the gate. You can, get your weapons, buy stuff, and then sort of deeper in are the faction headquarters. That's the inside of the Mages College. And this is the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary in Dawnstar. That's what that looks like. And so if you have factions, you also have quests. And the cities are hubs of quests, and they're all different kinds of quests. There are city quests, Daedric quests, faction quests, and radiant quests. And I'll go into those as well. So the interesting thing about this, okay, this is the Dawnstar Sanctuary is actually the second Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary. The first one gets burned to the ground. But what's interesting about this is, as a sort of unique sort of exercise in city architecture and working with the world artists and the level designers, this is the faction headquarters, but it is actually a faction quest location too. If you played the game, this is actually a dungeon first. where you fight through, you go through the dungeon fighting these spectral assassins, these ghosts, and at the end of the game, this becomes a faction headquarters. And so for us, this is a really great reuse of space because it was designed so that it served the function of both a faction headquarters and a dungeon. The way it served it as a dungeon was basically just by locking off doors and streamlining your passage through so that we could have scripted sequences and then it functioned as a level. And then later on, when it became a faction headquarters, all those doors were unlocked, you have full access to the whole place, and you can wander around freely. And so for us, it's because of the sheer amount of content that we have to do, we try to reuse space as much as humanly possible. And when I talked about vibe in the cities and having unique art and architecture, again, we, as much as we could, try to reuse art assets. Now, I'll go through the different types of quests. What is a city quest? Well, a city quest, remember I talked about Windhelm. I said one of the thieves in Windhelm, in my design doc, in my head when I wrote this, I'm like, I want the serial killer thing. Well, it turns out we actually put that in the game. So a city quest to us is any quest that takes place within the confines of the city. Okay, it uses the space, it uses the architecture, it uses the NPCs. And for me, this is a really great example of all that stuff coming together. And again, wrapping back around to like production, art, design, code, all coming together. And this quest sort of represents that. So basically, you go to the graveyard in the city, in Windhelm, and you realize that a woman has been horribly murdered. There's a serial killer on the loose, and so you get that quest, and you have to figure out what's going on and solve the mystery. I actually think that, if I remember correctly, every headstone in that graveyard actually has the date 11/11/11, which was the ship date. So here you go. The altar is built to some unknown magic. It looks like someone is using body parts towards some gruesome end. So you get to uncover the mystery of why the serial killer is doing this. But the whole quest culminates with you finding out who the serial killer is and stopping him before he claims his last victim. And so for us, his last victim, I forget her name, his last victim is this very specific NPC that he's going to kill at night in the city. And again, this all takes place in the city. So you have, we had to alter the guard patrols and make, and sometimes you can get them to help. So this is actually, you can stop this from happening. This is a scripted sequence, but like most of our scripted sequences, if you get involved, you can alter the outcome. And so you can actually prevent this killing from happening and then chase the guy down. Now, again, I go back to because our game is a simulation and we wanted the player to be able to affect the world the way they wanted to, and this is where we use a term called handling. In Elder Scrolls games, in Fallout games, in all the games that we do, we handle things. And what handling means for us is we cover contingencies. We have to cover all the edge cases of things because we want our players to be able to experiment. And so what that meant for this quest is that this woman might not exist in the game because you may have killed her, right? And so what happens then? Does the whole quest fall apart? Do we have to prevent it from happening? No. We have a system called a radiant system is what we call it. He will choose another victim. So he will go onto the street and we'll put another NPC from the city will get murdered instead. So just for luck. But that's a good example of that. Now, this is the City of Solitude. City of Solitude is the capital of Skyrim. There's a lot of stuff takes place in Solitude, and I'm going to talk about some stuff there. Some screenshots of Solitude. And that is the Blue Palace. That is where the Jarl lives, in Solitude. And so we also have quests in Skyrim that are, a lot of these come right in the cities. They're called Daedric quests. The Daedra are the demons of Elder Scrolls, and we have these Daedric quests. And one of these takes place right in the Blue Palace. There's actually a closed down wing of the Blue Palace that is like dark and haunted and creepy, and you actually end up going into the mind of this guy, Pelagius, and you meet Sheogorath, who is the mad god in Elder Scrolls. And so this entire quest takes place in the city, in this building, in this other little landscape that we made. And then when you come out of here, you're right back in the city. Sheogorath is voiced by Wes Johnson, who's one of our favorite voice actors. He's been doing that for us for years. Now, this is the Temple of the Divines, and this is a Dark Brotherhood quest. This is a perfect example of collaboration between art and design, but also compromise. And boy, did we have to compromise a lot. So I had this quest in the Dark Brotherhood where, if you've seen Game of Thrones, the Red Wedding, where people get horribly murdered at a wedding. So I wanted to do that in the Dark Brotherhood. And so I have this quest where you kill this woman. It's the cousin of the emperor. You're trying to kill the emperor, but he refuses to come to Skyrim. So you kill his cousin to draw him, to force him to come and deal with that situation. And so what I wanted was, I had this plan. It was the wedding was going to happen in this building, the Church of the Divines. But here's where we get to the realities of professional video game development, right? And here's where we talk about, art working with design and how production comes in as well, right? Because a lot of times, art and design don't line up necessarily. So I had this quest planned. The assassination was going to happen in this building, but the building had already gotten made because production had put together the art schedule, because that's how you make a video game, and we had certain spaces that had to be made, and this city got made, and this temple got made. And when I went into the temple, I went, shit, this is not going to work for the quest. It doesn't have the connectability, it doesn't have anything I need, so what do? Like, this quest is going to take a nosedive. And so instead of putting it inside the building, and there's the bride and the groom, I spoke to the artist, Raphael, and we were like, what can we do? And we collaborated on having the wedding outside. So actually, instead of putting it inside, the wedding actually takes place here, right outside. And when I looked at the architecture that was already there, I was like, oh yeah, I can use that. So for example, these little crenellations there, this door that leads up there, that wasn't there originally. We put that connectivity in so that you could get up there and use that as a sniping spot. And I leave they've left a bow for you with like magic arrows so you can take them out that way. And so we're trying to use the existing space in the city for the quest. And so we have we realized you could already get up on the walls here, and I really didn't have to alter much. The guards occasionally would do patrols up there, and that naturally lent itself to the quest. Sometimes you would have to avoid them. We're like, okay, what else can we do? I want to have multiple ways to take these people out. And so we had these gargoyles. I'm like, oh, can we do this thing where, we'll make a special piece of art so you can, activate the gargoyle and drop it on top of them. It's like, oh yeah, we can do that. So that's exactly what happened. So that's, and this is all just basically using all of the existing architecture. So for me, that was a great example of a compromise between art design and the realities of production, and how the city actually came together. And by the way, code, the other important part. Why is there a picture of a werewolf right here? Because yes, you can turn into a werewolf in Skyrim. And so this whole quest is a great example of AI going haywire. And that's where speaking to code about AI, you can, if you don't want to drop the gargoyle head or snipe her, you can turn into a werewolf. And that the way the werewolf works, if someone sees you turning into a werewolf, it's a crime. But if they don't, it's not. So we have this in Skyrim, and this plays out in every city. We have a bounty system, this crime system. And the guards will come at you if your bounty is high enough. And so, but you have relationships with different NPCs. And so depending on how much of the game you've played and the relationship you've had, you can accomplish this many ways. If you turn into a werewolf and nobody knows, you can kill them free and run away. you can, if a dragon attacks the city in the middle of this wedding, the guards will freak out and go fight the dragon. If you are friends, sometimes if your faction is high enough with some of the NPCs, the guests will start fighting each other and do the work for you. And that was not planned. That was just all part of the simulation. And it all just working the way it should. Now, another type of quest we had is a Radiant quest. And so the Radiant quest system in Skyrim came in pretty late. And what I mean by Radiant is we could procedurally generate content. So this is a guy in Whiterun. This is a guy that I put in and wrote. His name is Amron, and it's a very simple quest. When you encounter Amron, he's speaking to his wife, and she's angry because he's obsessed with finding his father's sword. And he wants to be this adventurer. He wants to find this sword, and that's Amron's sword right there. And, my Sapphire doesn't like that I've been spending so much time looking for my father's old sword. It's the most basic thing. But the thing with these quests is late in beta in Skyrim, we realized that the cities were a little bit they're a little bit light on content. And so we were able to put in 2 or 3 little quests like this per day and really pad in the game. And so when we say Radiant, what does that mean for this quest? You have to go find his sword. But the sword can be any number of places. Halted Stream Camp, Whiterun's Retreat, Silent Moon's Camp, Swindler's Den, Valtheim Towers, White River Watch. And these are all different locations that exist in the game. They have different enemy types. And the sword is placed in a container in that dungeon. And so that gameplay experience is different for everyone. And so our Radiant quest system really allowed us to expand upon that stuff. The Civil War. Okay, so what is the Civil War? The big theme of the game is the Civil War is really interesting in Skyrim because the theme fictionally of the game of the landmass of Skyrim is the Imperial Legion and the Stormcloaks, 2 very opposing factions, which actually has nothing to do with the main quest, which is dragons coming back. So you have 2 sort of and they sort of overlap, right? Like you do the main quest and you deal with all the dragon stuff, but also this Civil War thing is going on in the background. It's this fictional thing. And so, but we wanted the Civil War to actually exist in the game. And I have to admit, I did not think, until late beta, I did not think the Civil War was going to ship in the game because we had so many problems trying to implement it. And so basically, the Civil, and why did I think that? Because the Civil Wars all culminate in battles in the cities. So now we have these cities that have to have all these NPCs, all these schedules, all the things I talked about. Now they have to function as gameplay spaces as well with these scripted battles. And it was crazy. And so the Civil War, you've got the Stormcloaks, and you've got the Imperial Legion, and they fight it out. And so, the designer who did this, John Paul, he was promised 50 NPCs on screen. He got 20. And so he tried to stage a battle with 20 NPCs, 10 against 10, right? And so he had to do some very creative scheduling and management with this system of reinforcements that come in. So that when you're not looking, around the corner or behind a load, another group of people come in so that it becomes manageable. And we sort of learned this lesson at the end of Oblivion. We had a giant pitched battle with all these NPCs that was a nightmare to implement. And so we sort of learned those lessons. But this stuff plays out right in the city streets. And, we had to, when a battle happens, we had to lock all the NPCs in their houses. They can't come out. And it disrupts the entire city experience until the battle is resolved. So there's another. It's an example of a fight, a Civil War battle, right? If you look at it from this angle, if you're on the ground in the middle of this combat, it seems like a lot. But I mean, look, it's a bar fight, right? That's not a war. And of course, last but not least, dragons. Okay, the dragons in Skyrim. they were obviously a major production point, culmination of art and some design, but mostly art and code. Where the design came in was how the dragons would interact with the overall system of the game. And so, for example, these are the dragons. If they showed up in a city, this is actually the town guard killing a dragon. So when a dragon comes and attacks, all the guards will rush to fight it. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. This is actually, and this happened to me several times, if it looks like you're casting a spell, it's because you are, because that is the College of Mages at Winterhold. And so a lot of times, you would just be doing the Mages Guild quests, and you would go back to the college, and there'd be a dragon sitting on the roof of the Mages Guild. And you're like, oh shit, so now I have to deal with a dragon as I'm trying to do my quest. And so that happened all the time. All right, so when we talk about all the things that went into Skyrim and went into the cities, what didn't make the cut? If you guys remember from the very beginning of the talk, I mentioned the pit, which was the fighting arena in Windhelm. It was one of the central locations. That's the pit. And if it looks like there are missing textures and stuff, that's because there are, the pit was never, it got cut. It wasn't in the game. Someone found these resources and realized what this was. And so I was really disappointed with this because I was so invested in this. One of the things I did on Oblivion was the arena. So I worked with a designer to try to get this. And in fact, I had to alter the Dark Brotherhood quest line because one of the main quests in the Dark Brotherhood was one of your victims was a fighter in the arena. You were supposed to kill him in the arena. But we realized that the designer who was doing this, great guy, no fault of his, he was overtasked, he had other responsibilities. The amount of work to get an arena functioning is real. The lesson we learned in Oblivion, really super, super high. And so we realized that at the end of the day, it wasn't worth it, so we cut the arena. What didn't make the cut? Winterhold. So you could say, what do you mean? Winterhold is in the game. The College of Mages, there's a city. Yeah, but look at it. Look at the size of it, right? This is the city of Winterhold, okay? That's the entire city. We realized when it came time to make Winterhold, we were running out of time. We didn't have the art resources. We didn't have the time to implement it. And so we had a creative solution, is that because the Mages College is here, we have fiction that basically says, oh, because of some magical accident, half of the city fell into the sea. So that's how we covered it. Yeah, right? What else didn't make the cut? So this is that Civil War. The Civil War was originally supposed to take place in every city in Skyrim, okay? In fact, the game shipped with all the scripting already in place to have the Civil War in every city. But in the game, it only takes place in 3 cities, I believe. And the designer who did this, he actually had written all of the dialogue for the battle taking place in every city. And when the reason we had to cut it is because one of the things we had to do is when we made the cities that we knew would have the Civil War, because of the amount of NPCs and the processing, we had to make the art, especially, we had to scale it down in places. And so there were cities where the Civil War was spec'd to be. We didn't have time to go back and modify the art so that it would run at an acceptable frame rate. And so he wrote all this dialogue. I think it might have even been recorded. And I remember he asked production, can I just keep it in the game? Can it ship with the dialogue? So no. So he took it all. We had to strip it all out. And so that didn't make it. What didn't make the cut? This is Windhelm. Remember I told you that Windhelm was the city of snow and stone, right? Well, there's lots of stone. There's not a whole lot of snow, right? It sort of has the illusion of being snowy, right? But really, the snow sort of didn't make it. But thankfully, one of the cool things about our games is our community. And because we put out our tools, we've had something literally, this is a real, over 1 billion mods downloaded from our modding community. And one of those mods is the Snowy AF Windhelm. Someone actually added the snow back to Windhelm. And it's amazing, too. It looks fantastic. So going forward, these lessons we learned from doing the cities in Skyrim, what did that mean for us? Well, we took these lessons directly into Fallout 4. When you go to the city of Good Neighbor in Fallout 4, one of the things you're greeted with is this opening scene. And guess what? Look at stabbings, right? Huh? We know what the kids like. So there's that opening scene there. There's the opening scene of... And actually, one of the lessons we learned, this is the opening scene of Diamond City in Fallout 4, and this opening scene more directly involves the character and leads directly into your entrance into the city. And so, one of the other things going forward, though, I talked about how originally the idea for Skyrim was to have a giant city with no loads. Well, in Fallout 4 is really unique for us because you have these two encapsulated walled cities, Good Neighbor and Diamond City, that lead to these separate loads. But those two cities, those fictional cities, exist within the actual city of Boston, which is something we've never been able to do before, is have a giant open city that does stream in seamlessly, that you can go, that has very few loads. And so, what was really helpful for me doing this talk is remembering all these lessons, because opening scenes and NPCs, and even right the day before I left to come here, ended up working with a design team on the project we're working on now to revisit some of the stuff we're working on and use these lessons learned and all the stuff that I can't talk about. But thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so as yesterday, we have the microphone set up at the front if anyone has any questions for Emil.
Hello.
Hi.
First and foremost, great talk.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. I really like Oblivion, and I was wondering, what part of Oblivion's development process did you take a look at and realize, oh, we need to do things differently for Skyrim? What was one of the big things that changed?
A lot of stuff. When I look at the cities are a good example. Actually, the biggest city in Oblivion is the Imperial City, and the Imperial City it's huge, and there were even fewer NPCs per city. And so if you go back and play Oblivion and go to the Imperial City, there are some avenues that are just really long sight lines where nothing happens. And so the illusion of that being a real place really falls apart a little bit. And so we going forward into Skyrim, we try to build the cities so that we could accommodate the small number of NPCs, but to feel like it was filled in more. So that's one good example.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for sharing all this. First of all, I was really curious. You were talking about the process of obviously, you guys do a lot of simulation based. The simulation is huge for you guys.
Yeah.
And you were talking about that someone an NPC that's crucial to a mission dies, and so you swap in an alternate. At what point do you start saying? And at what point do you stop supporting edge cases? Because obviously, then that alternate dies, then that alternate dies.
That's a great question. That really came up during. I remember Fallout 3. It came up in Fallout 3. There's a town called Megaton where you have to disarm a bomb. And so you can get the quest to disarm this bomb in the middle of the city, but you can kill the guy that gave you the quest. And so his name is Lucas Sims. He's the sheriff. He wants you to disarm the bomb. Well, you can disarm the bomb, but before you go back to collect your reward, you can kill him. We're you do make or he can die some other way, but if he's dead, you can't get your reward. So we're how do we cover that? And so we actually have he's got a son in the game, his little 10-year-old son will cry and say, my daddy's dead, but here's your money, and so for us, it's basically we go one level past. If you kill an NPC, there might be an alternate, and then after that, it's for fuck's sake, we can't cover everything. We've done enough. Mm-hmm. So usually we go one level beyond. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
He just asked the question I was going to ask, so thanks.
Sure.
Thank you for a good talk again.
Thank you.
Say, may you deny or confirm the rumor that all of Oblivion's dialogue wasn't recorded based on areas or anything? It was recorded alphabetically?
The recording of the dialogue?
Yeah, people have been speaking that it is a bit disjointed because it was actually recorded alphabetically. That is this rumor going about.
I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I don't know if that's true or false. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. Our process for recording voice actors in VO was so much different. We do all of our recording now with actors in LA, using professional studios. Back in the Oblivion days, we were working with local studios and local talent in Washington, D.C., and it was... And our sound guy, Mark Lampert, who's amazing, it was just him back then. And so we were organizing everything the best way we could. So it wouldn't surprise me if we did it alphabetically just for management. Because really what happened is we have a system now called rolling dialogue where we started doing this during Fallout 4, and we'll do it continuing going forward, where we record the final dialogue throughout the length of the project. But back in the Oblivion days, it was all recorded just at the end. And so that's probably, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, what's your favorite city in Skyrim and why?
What's my favorite city in Skyrim? Good question. I think Whiterun maybe, because I did so much work there. I do love the Thieves Guild stuff in Riften. But I think Whiterun is probably my favorite. Because of Dragon's Reach and the dragon can land up there and stuff, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
What's your favorite mod in Skyrim and why?
My favorite what?
Mod.
My favorite mod in Skyrim? Oh, man. That's a good question. A lot of the high-res graphic stuff is really impressive, like, a lot of the faces and things and stuff. And people ask, like, it always comes up, like, well, why couldn't the faces have looked that good in the shipping game, or why don't they have the high detail? Because the thing with mods is you can turn them on or turn them off as you will, and when you make a mod, mods break the game. Okay, so you might run into areas where you're processing these really high-def faces that'll slow the game to a crawl. We don't have the luxury of allowing that, and so, but some of the graphic stuff that has gone in since then, it's been really incredible.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. This question is more about Fallout 4, if that's
Sure.
okay. So you mentioned Good Neighbor.
Yeah.
I have a little funny story because while playing the game, I tried to find the entrance to Good Neighbor. I could not find it. I looked all around. I just could not get my way to it. So I just climbed a bunch of buildings, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, I can see Good Neighbor from above. What happens if I jump into it? Suddenly a loading screen. I'm at the entrance of Good Neighbor.
Yes.
I'm like, was that intentional?
It was. And
was?
that's actually that's a really good point. So Good Neighbor, the city in Fallout 4, originally was not walled. Originally, it was just existing within the city of Boston. And so a little trick for us for the cities, there are actually advantages to having the cities be separate loads. And a lot of that is how you deal with the AI. Before that city was a separate load, you would get into combat outside the city, and the super mutants would basically aggro everyone in the city. And so by the time you got into the city, everyone was freaking out, so it was its own load. But one of the things that we have in the city of Boston, there are some very high rooftops, and you have power armor with the frickin' jetpack that allows you to, so we knew that the player could have jetpacked over the wall into the city, so we knew that we had to accommodate that. That's why if you do get over the wall, it will load into the actual city. So that was intentional.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
So one thing I've been wondering about, because I've had some weird experiences trying to make things in the Skyrim engine.
Sure.
What was the biggest, what limit in the engine caught you the most off guard that made you have to redo your designs?
Oh, great question. Well, one of the things when we were doing Skyrim, we switched our scripting system to what we call Papyrus, a proprietary scripting system. The scripting system in Oblivion was a lot more basic. In a way, it was a lot more user-friendly. And it was, so I had to simplify some designs, and like, you know, it took me and some other folks a little bit longer to get up to speed with the scripting system. It took longer to get that stuff to work, and so I would say that the switch to that scripting system. But the reason we switched the scripting system is the original scripting system was not processor friendly at all. It slowed the game down too much, so we had to really improve it. But it had an effect on design back then because we were switching over to it in mid-project.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Hey,
Hi.
did you, for the smaller cities in Skyrim, originally intend them, like Falkreath and Dawnstar, for them to have their own type of architecture and walls?
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we did like, you know, Markarth is a good example. Markarth is a good example of architecture that's built right into the side of the buildings, but like Dawnstar is a good example of, it's more like a village, and so it sort of uses existing art. There are a couple of unique pieces. We realized even if we're reusing existing art assets, if we had one or two unique ones to set it apart, that would do. So yeah, a bit of a mix.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you all for your great questions, and thank you so much, Emil.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you so
Pagliarulo.
much.